Welcome back to Star Wars Escape Pod and to our Lightspeed series, giving you Star Wars news and headlines in under 15 minutes for those very short commutes, for those walks with a dog. If you want to hear about any of the Star Wars headlines, of course, you can come to Star Wars Escape Pod and check out our Lightspeed series covering all that stuff, which we just put out on a non-scheduled base, just pretty much whenever there's some headlines to talk about, because most of our podcast is actually featured on very specific Star Wars content and getting into things like shows and books and very specific topics kind of thing. So it's not very common that we cover a lot of the Star Wars news going out there, the minor stuff. So that's why we've got Lightspeed. It just covers that part of Star Wars that many people might miss on our normal podcast episodes, but it's also a great way to give you podcast news as well in just another format. So we'll start off with Star Wars podcast news. Next Monday is when our discussion review drops. It's 2.5 hours for Star Wars Light of the Jedi, which is the Charles Soule Star Wars novel that kicks off the High Republic era, which dropped in January. And we've given ourselves and our listeners some time to kind of make your way through that book. And if you haven't read it before, we did a 2.5 hour long episode, supersized episode, breaking down the events of that story, the characters, the lore, all that stuff. And so, we really don't give you a reason to even read the book afterwards. But our first recommendation before we even start the episode is that you do go out and read the book for yourself. There's no better way to experience a Star Wars story. But if you want to hear us chat about the High Republic and about Light of the Jedi and the beginning of the Marvel Comics High Republic run, as well as the IDW High Republic Adventures run, then you can check out that episode, which drops on Monday, February 22nd. So this past week, we also had our review and discussion with myself and Reed about the Tales from Galaxy's Edge VR game, which dropped quite a few months ago now on the Oculus platform. It was a fairly great discussion. We really dialed it in well. If you want to hear all about that game, if you don't have a VR headset, maybe if you're considering buying one, it's a great episode to kind of listen in about that game, the story, the characters, how the game even works, all that stuff. If you're interested in VR to any degree, it's a great episode to check out. Highly recommend it. So once again, that's our most recent episode that dropped on Monday, called Tales from the Galaxy's Edge VR game review breakdown. Spoilers are included. So on to the Star Wars news. Main headline out there is that Lucasfilm has ensured that Gina Carano is not going to be returning as the character of Cara Dune in The Mandalorian. And this is it's been covered by pretty much every news outlet in town, and I don't want to get into detail about it. It is quite a infuriating situation to many people, and hurtful at best, and political to many degrees. And it's not something I'd like to focus in on our program. So all I'm going to say is that she is just not going to come back as the character. And if you wish to have any further details, to look them up for yourself and read through the details on another news platform, because again, it's not something I want to cover. It's not something I like to get into, and it sucks anytime someone does lose a job in the first place. So it's negative headlines, and of course I hate that stuff, but it's worth mentioning anyways to anyone who might not have heard about it yet, that no, she will not be coming back. And this has had an impact on some of the merchandise that you guys can get on the shelf. So apparently, according to some sources, Hasbro has now scrapped producing any more Cara Dune action figures. So if you had your eye on a Cara Dune action figure, or if you wish to perhaps, not that I support scalping, but if you do want to maybe make a bit of money or have some sort of Star Wars exclusive product in the future that will no longer be produced, you may want to pick up the Black Series 6-inch Cara Dune action figure that was released a little while ago. Because there's not going to be very many after this whole situation has gone down. So just a heads up, as well as any Lego boxes that might have the character in it, it's a likely scenario that we're not going to have that character reproduced anytime in the future. And if they are reproducing that character in toy format, then that's fine. I have nothing against the character, but it is at the moment a touchy scenario. So I think they've just called it quits on producing any merchandise in relation to the character. So that's just a heads up there. Again, I got that piece of information from the Superhero Hype website. Now, I don't know how reliable they are as far as information goes, but that's an article that was published on Monday, February 15th. And I just thought it was an interesting piece of information and quite believable under the current situation. So anyway, that is my piece on that topic, and we'll move on to the books and comics here. So as I mentioned earlier, with our upcoming episode review of Light of the Jedi and the kickoff of the Marvel comic series for the High Republic, as well as the IDW High Republic Adventures lineup. IDW is the other comic book company that's producing Star Wars comics, and all their comics have adventures written on them. And they've produced everything from Star Wars comics taking place with the prequel characters all the way up to the sequel characters. And now they're publishing a High Republic lineup, which focuses in on some Jedi Padawans and Master Yoda in this time period, which is pretty cool. The High Republic lineup from Marvel is supposed to correlate directly with the novel Light of the Jedi, and that's also why we brought it up in the novel review that we did of Light of the Jedi by Charles Soule. So if you're interested in those series, they did start last month, and the second issue of the Marvel lineup dropped February 3rd. The first issue of the IDW Adventures lineup dropped February 3rd as well, and we're going to be getting more issues in that lineup in the coming weeks, as well as the most recent High Republic novel by Claudia Gray, Into the Dark, launched February 2nd, and the online launch event happened February 4th. So if you're into all the latest High Republic stuff, of course, you don't want to miss Claudia Gray's Into the Dark, which also introduces the new evil in the galaxy, aside from the Nihil, which is the main force of antagonists in the High Republic era throughout the story. Into the Dark introduces the Drenger, which is a sort of a carnivorous, plant-based, sentient species that are introduced in that book. They have been introduced in Star Wars before, believe it or not. They made a mention in the Rise of Kylo Ren comic book, as well as a first appearance in the Star Wars Dark Legends novel written by George Mann, which is a collection of short stories, which is supposed to sort of correlate as an in-universe book for Tales, or for Batu. So if you go to Batu, you can pick up this book at one of their stores, I believe. Published by the Disney Lucasfilm Press. It's a canon short story collection of very similar to the Myths and Fables book that also dropped quite a while ago. I think it was last year or something. But the Drenger have their own story in that novel called A Bitter Harvest, which I don't know if it's in the actual public version of the book, or if it was just in I think it was just in the Target exclusive edition, but I don't know how that works with getting a hold of that short story, whether or not you need the Target exclusive edition, or if you can now pick up that edition elsewhere in the world and other bookstores. But the short story is called A Bitter Harvest. So if you're interested in sampling kind of what that species is all about, it's supposed to be a pretty cool short story that introduced that species, now being brought to life more so as a focus in the High Republic Into the Dark, and will be brought into the Marvel lineup with issues number 3 and 4 apparently. So we'll see what happens there, but just worth mentioning that will be something kind of on the horizon as far as a new species of focus goes in the coming waves of content that we're going to be getting from Lucasfilm in the High Republic era. So all that's pretty cool stuff. We have some videos being dropped on the Star Wars YouTube channel as well that are supposed to give us a sample of different characters and different events that might be happening in the High Republic era. And if you haven't subscribed to their YouTube channel, I definitely recommend it, as well as tune into their monthly show called Star Wars The High Republic Show, which has now replaced the Star Wars show as a monthly episodic Star Wars series on their YouTube channel. But for any Star Wars headlines and news in under 4 or 5 minutes, you can always watch their This Week in Star Wars, which does just that. It kind of scans through all the latest stuff in Star Wars merchandise and books and this and that, all that kind of thing, which is all very cool and definitely worth mentioning for you to subscribe to them. More recently, under the Hasbro action figures lineup, they've been releasing action figures that have been designed to celebrate not only the Phantom Menace, but 50 years at Lucasfilm. So this year is the 50th anniversary of Lucasfilm as a company, and Hasbro's releasing Phantom Menace Episode 1 card-backed 6-inch action figures with the likes of both Jar Jar Binks, Mace Windu, we got Qui-Gon Jinn coming to us, as well as new action figures for the Black Series lineup, which is the same thing, but now not Episode 1 card-backed. We got stuff from the Bad Batch with one of those Phantom Corps troopers. We also have Kenner-styled Black Series coming with the likes of Greedo and Jawa and Obi-Wan Kenobi in this really ghetto-looking cape, which is all supposed to mimic the classic Kenner action figures, as well as an AT-ST driver from Return of the Jedi, an Ewok Princess Leia. Those are the 3.3 and 3¾ inches. And we're also going to be getting Darth Maul and Ahsoka Tano added to the 3 3/4 inch lineup as well for anyone who collects those. So that was all announced more recently, and very cool information there. So if you're interested in Star Wars action figures, then that is some great information for you as well. The IDW's number 2 comic will be launching very soon as well. I think that's going to be coming out March 3rd, so you can pre-order that on Comixology or buy it at your local comic book store. And once again, anyone following the comic books, that was something I forgot to mention there, but I did read the first issue of that. It's actually not a bad lineup. At first, I thought the Adventures lineup was kind of more specifically for younger readers, but there's actually a lot of text in there. And it might just be the source content, like violence-wise, that might not be the most mature stuff, but it's actually the story itself is shaping up to be not so bad. And we actually talked about it on our discussion of Light of the Jedi, so don't miss that episode. But yeah, it was actually not bad. I was fairly impressed with the IDW Adventures lineup for the High Republic specifically. I haven't read any of the other ones, but that one so far, it's shaping up to be not so bad. The last thing I have to talk about is Marvel's very cryptic new teaser about a Boba Fett series that they might be doing. They did release a cover that had a subtext called Boba Fett, Nowhere to Hide, and he's kind of a silhouetted figure holding like an axe and a blaster and this crazy red looking background of something. So I thought it was interesting, and stay tuned to StarWars.com and their This Week in Star Wars show to possibly find out what that is. And, we're another Boba Fett comic series of any kind is always going to be a good one. Maybe it'll tie into the Bounty Hunters lineup that's happening right now. I have no idea. But that is the last piece of news that we have for you today on this week on our Lightspeed show. So stay tuned again for Star Wars Escape Pod. Share the show with your friends. It's a great way to help us kind of get out there a little more. Follow our Twitter feed at SW Escape Podcast. And don't forget to rate us a 5-star if you can. If you got 3 seconds to open up that app and smash the 5 stars, that would be great. Thanks, guys. We'll see you next time on Star Wars Escape Pod. May the Force be with you.